Welcome to the journey of an aesthete, a comprehensive examination of all things aesthetic, the arts, the humanities, and what it means to be human.
Aryeh Cohen-Wade?
Yes, hi.
We finally meet. This is Mitch Hampton from Journey of an Aesthete podcast.
Hi, Mitch. Sorry about that. Yeah, I just missed the call and give me but now works for me if it works for you as well.
It's working. We're talking. You can hear my voice. I can hear yours, and I'll do a little blurb up front, spoken, if you don't mind. And I have a lot of different kinds of people on our show. Mostly artists, musicians, writers. Occasionally, I'll have people like yourself if they're really good at what they do in terms of communication. And I think the reason why you're on the show is I was originally a fan of Culturally Determined. And that's, I think, the main way I know you is from that show, right, on bloggingheads.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you.
That's one reason. And also I really I consider being a host of a show an art form. And I consider it something that one can do well or not so well. And I'm really struck by your even-handedness, your civility, your wit, your intelligence, and I love the way that you interact with the guests. And that alone would be enough for you to be on our show. But in addition to that, I like the way you talk about aesthetic and political topics that are topical, but talk about them in a way that's not alienating, that's relatable to a general audience. And that's also very informative and educational. So those are some of the qualities that I really like about what you've been doing.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
Generally on our show, we like to do a personal bio of the guests and sort of figure out, how they come to do the work that they're doing. So in your case, I'm not an expert. I don't know a lot about your background. So do you mind talking a little bit about your story with communication and doing shows and writing, anything that comes to your mind that we should know? Or
sure. So let's see. So on the personal side, I grew up in suburb in northern New Jersey, and had sort of, I don't know, more or less mainstream cultural interest, but was into comic books and stuff like that as a kid. But and went to Yale University, was an English major there.
Interesting.
And was a fan of this website, bloggingheads TV, that was founded in 2005. And I graduated in 2005 also. And after college, I was doing freelance jobs and other stuff, looking for full-time work. And I would listen to blogging heads sort of in the background when I was doing graphic design work and other sort of random things. And then they were looking to expand and were hiring freelancers. And so I was hired in 2007 there as a freelancer and was more or less there for with a couple of gaps for the rest of my professional career. And I was behind the scenes in the editorial role there.
Okay.
For a long time. And
interesting.
Didn't really see myself. I saw myself as a behind the scenes type person for a long time, and then sort of had the chance to start doing some things in front of the microphone of the camera. Mm-hmm. And after 7 or 8 years of being behind the scenes, so it was not something that I planned on doing in various ways. And when I started working there, podcasts were the term podcast wasn't widely known, and the blogging itself is sort of a proto podcast at that point.
Hold that thought, would it be fair to say they were in an embryonic or infancy type stage, then I would imagine, right? They're certainly not what they are now, but it fascinates me that your being a host is sort of accidental and that you were more, I'll come back to this. One of the things that strikes me about your show is how intellectually curious and sophisticated it is. And I can't help but think that maybe Yale plays a role in that. Maybe yes, maybe no. That you bring a lot of learning to the show, and I appreciate that. But would it be fair to say that this is sort of a new thing for you? Do you had planned on doing more kind of research, scholarly type of work rather than hosting or rather than communicating? Or was it something that you sort of always in the back of your mind thought, well, I can do this too? Or do you understand my questions? Or was it more something you felt?
Yeah. Well, I first, I definitely did not see when I was hired at bloggingheads, I was, doing a behind the scenes editorial role. I definitely did not see myself as the type of person who would be, playing the role of host or anything like that. I think I was sort of naturally shy and nervous and wouldn't, in class, in high school and college, I would raise my hand and participate, but I would often, be nervous before speaking publicly and stuff like that. So it definitely wasn't something I was aiming for as being sort of like a performer or anything like that. But I kind of, kind of fell into it and found that I was at least okay at it. And I don't know, I think I sort of always saw myself as like a generalist and did not have any particular expertise, but had curiosity and enough background knowledge to be able to pursue things, but was usually more interested in, being the one asking the questions instead of giving the answers or something along those lines.
Right. Well, it's interesting. Maybe it's just a confluence of factors, right? I mean, you certainly have the learning and knowledge. So were you hired by Robert Wright when you first started? Was it mainly, he was sort of the person that was in charge of Blogging Heads at that time, or would it have been?
Yes, it was Robert Wright. The site was founded by Bob Wright, Mickey Kaus, and a computer program engineer named Greg Dingle. And Bob sort of took over running it pretty early on, and Mickey sort of receded.
Well, we know what happened to him. We could either bring that up or not bring that up, or table it for later.
Yeah.
But I am interested in your experience at Yale. Were you at Yale post Harold Bloom or pre, or what?
Well, it was during, and I audited one class from him. But so I was there 01 to 05. He was certainly very famous at that time, but I think he had sort of, he called himself like a Department of One or something along those lines. Like he had left the English department and was in this other department called Humanities, and I think sort of did his own thing and was, sort of the most famous,
right,
like person who was teaching literature there, but also like not like embedded in the he wasn't in the English department at all. So,
well, I'm aware that there was tension. And as you know, I'm a big fan of his. In part, I say in part because, of course, I disagree with him about as many things as I admire in him. I mean, our show is, after all, called Aesthete, Journey of an Aesthete. Harold Bloom famously called himself an aesthete, I think, in both the Paris Review interview in the mid-90s. And that was actually one of the reasons I named my podcast what I named it, actually. So there is that connection. On the other hand, comic books, I'm much more, shall we say, egalitarian and diverse in what I think is valuable than he was.
Right. I believe I remember he wrote this op-ed or review for the New York Times Book Review or something about Harry Potter.
Oh, yeah.
In which he called it like, a penny dreadful or something like that. That may have been right before I started college or something. So, I mean, he was, the elitist of all elitists.
He was.
And,
But, what's really more interesting is that his former students are like Camille Paglia, who's a student of his, again, is more like myself, or perhaps you, in that she's, was a fan of Charlie's Angels, the TV show, and, Elizabeth Taylor and Cleopatra, things that I'm sure Harold Bloom would have been, things of which he would have been dismissive. But, of course, Harry Potter was the more notorious takedown of him. But what was your, I don't want to spend too much time on him unless you think that we should. What did you glean from him as a teacher, a figure, a thinker that influences you now, or not, or I'm just a well-rounded?
Well, I only audited a single class he taught on Shakespeare's tragedies and romances when I was a senior, and I was writing. The requirement for the English major was you had to either write an independent essay or take a senior seminar. So I was taking a seminar on Shakespeare, taught by David Quint, who I believe is still there at Yale. And I sort of thought, and I realized it was my last chance, first semester, senior year, to, see Bloom, see the great man.
See him.
And
Bloom.
so
exactly.
I went to the first class, and it was a seminar that he was teaching, and afterwards I just went up to him and asked if it would be okay if I audited the class, and he said something like, yes, my child, or yes, my dear, or something.
Yeah.
And so I attended every subsequent class, but didn't write a paper, and was also way too scared to participate anyway, because he was a very intimidating presence.
Right. And
the classes would generally take the form of him asking a question about the week's text, and one of the students would sort of nervously raise their hand and offer an answer, and then he would say, no, that's wrong. And he would, monologue for 15 or 20 minutes. And then ask another question, and sort of the thing would repeat itself. So it was mainly him, talking, and he was definitely listening to what the students were saying, but, he definitely could just talk and talk and talk. and so I was way too intimidated to ever, even raise my hand in the class. And I felt like since I wasn't really taking the class, that sort of justified that. But so it was more like a kind of wild experience than,
it's interesting.
There were specific things that I imbibed from him.
Well, it's interesting because I guess I'm a little bit opposite you personality style. I guess I'm more extrovert. I'm certainly not shy. I've approached, I'm a pianist, and I've approached in my life great musicians who a lot of people would be intimidated by, just to glean their, famous musicians, just to sort of, just why not, sort of unafraid. But but on the other hand, I'm very accepting of different personalities. I think there's all kinds of ways to be in the world, and I certainly think introversion and shyness are not to be pathologized, and of course, I don't know if you thought this way about it, but I've often thought of introversion and shyness as actually having other skills and strengths that come with those qualities. Maybe it's the skills that you brought to Blogging Heads when you were first hired. Maybe you were doing certain kinds of research for Bob Wright or the folks there that, who knows, you would probably know more than, of course, I would, but that's getting too far ahead. But so you
right.
Yeah, but you.
Well, there might be something in being more of a listener than naturally more of a listener than a talker myself. And what I was doing behind the scenes for years was listening to the episodes and writing the titles and the headlines and the stuff that would appear on the homepage, and trying to come up with guests to talk to people and potential pairings and stuff. So I think naturally I was more sort of a editorial, someone who would respond to someone else's work and rather than be the instigator of the work myself. It's that once again sort of plays with, that I didn't intend to be a talking head type person.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, yet you were doing all this research, and I guess that I feel that's helped your show, and you've staked out. It's interesting because I remember I'm 54. I'm a different generation, and so I remember Robert Wright as a big figure in the mid '90s, and a kind of a famous figure in a way because of debates on evolutionary psychology. And at that time, I was and remain friendly to evolutionary psychology, actually. Having said that, I also think a lot of our life is culturally determined, right? So that's your. So I've always toyed with the idea of combining these two opposing ideas, and maybe something somewhere in the middle, or kind of something. I mean, I thought I'd mention that because, of course, your boss Robert Wright was in the forefront of all that, right? I mean, he was kind of really interested in those ideas, and I don't know. Did you talk with him about those matters much, or was it more? I don't know if that would have come up or not, or I guess it depends on the show.
Well, yeah. So I wasn't super familiar with Bob before I encountered him on Blogging Heads, basically, and so I mentioned Mickey Kess before. He's sort of become like my sort of semi half joke, half not joke, online nemesis. But his.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, I troll him in various ways when possible because I really sort of despise the political turn he's taken. But anyway, I first became aware of Blogging Heads because I started reading Slate when I was in college, around I think the 2004 election was when I started reading Slate for whatever reason. Yeah, and his blog was there, House Files, and he's an important figure as one of the first political bloggers. And since he started, and he's been friends with Bob since the New Republic days of the late 80s or early 90s. Right. And so when they started blogging it together, Mickey would include, links to the conversations in his on his blog, and so that's how I sort of got into it. And I was not the type of person who, as a 14-year-old, was reading back issues of the New Republic or National Review or commentary, anything like that. Right. That was not my world, and so I sort of got introduced to that world through the blogosphere and early Blogging Head stuff. And so then, but I definitely absorbed a lot of Bob Wright kind of thinking over the years. Yeah. And the title of Culturally Determined in some ways is just sort of a pun, but in other ways, I think of myself as more of sort of a materialist. And thinking about how what really, and that's more of the Bob Wright tradition, and what ultimately matters, material conditions, sort of basic superstructure stuff. But like I said, I sort of didn't know all this stuff before, was just a simple English major and was reading Shakespeare and stuff. So a lot of the political things that I learned about, I sort of absorbed from that early era.
Well, I'm a little confused. So you're saying that you certainly have an English background, an artistic background, aesthetics, right? But you were also interested in current affairs and news, and on your show now you have many strong discussions of politics. Do you see your projects as sort of combining everything and sort of saying, well, why have these boundaries? I'll have a journalist on my show, but I'll also have somebody who wrote a novel on my show. Is that kind of would you say that's a through line or something you were interested in doing? Or
yeah, I mean, I'm definitely interested in the interplay of culture and politics. And when I give sort of the description of the podcast, I say it's an interview show about culture and politics. And I'm interested in both those topics and places they overlap. At the same time, I'm sort of a style of criticism evolved over the past 10 years or so that's here's like, sort of taking, some pop culture object and, saying like it has good politics or it has bad politics, or here's the real problem with, Spider-Man 2 is XYZ. And so I don't generally like that kind of stuff. And so I try to avoid that. And so some episodes are purely about some cultural object, and I'm not trying to, like apply a Marxist lens to, the Marvel Cinematic Universe or something like that.
Right.
But other times there's some, cultural object or event that, I don't know, that seems to, that interests me because, it's somehow in between the two realms. I mean, the thing that, when I started the show, the thing that I was like, had no interest in it at all was sort of like horse race stuff or like inside the Beltway type stuff. And when I started, I was thinking it would be much more purely just kind of culture stuff because circa 2015, when I started it, Blogging Heads had like 6 other shows that were doing
wonky.
Here's what here's what was going on in the past 48 hours in politics. And so I was like, well, I'll stick. This will be sort of like the art section of the thing. And the 2016 election, of course, scrambled a lot of things.
It did.
In that world in various ways.
I mean, it really did. I mean, we could talk about how it's affected you and affected me. I mean, my response to the evil and insanity, if I could put it that way, of Trumpism was to go further into aesthetics and thinking that maybe having an aesthetics podcast that brings everybody together, almost kumbaya style, could be one response. I don't know, but that was that wasn't the only reason, but it was a factor. But I had been thinking about the arts for long before Trump, and certainly long before even the internet. I mean, after all, I was reading Harold Bloom in the 90s, so certainly that's a long time to be thinking about it. But you describe yourself as sort of politically. How would you describe your politics if you had to designate it? Because it's not clearly definable in your show, which maybe is to your credit. But you say you describe yourself as a materialist. Do you mean in the sense of a Darwinian sense, or do you mean in the sense of
okay, I sort of still think of myself as like a Obama Democrat.
Oh,
and
okay.
In sort of past political terms, and there's the scene in the movie Get Out where the father says, I would have voted for Obama a third time if I could have. And then it's revealed that he's like secretly evil and is stealing the bodies of like black people to put elderly white people's souls in their minds for them or something. And so it became a joke. But I sort of thought, I was basically aligned with Obama on both things. And the last time I was very excited about a politician was 2008 Obama. And that's sort of where I would position myself.
I see.
And so, but I'm definitely interested in more left politics, and I've had a lot of people on the show who are socialists. Because I think they're interesting people, and they're usually very smart. But I don't agree with their generally their practical political ideas. But yeah, and so often people are, people are sort of confused about my politics, so they're like, why don't you just embrace Bernie or something? And so, a lot of like the way politics unfolds online is very like tribal, and you pick one side and then you're totally for it and fighting against.
It's terrible. I mean, maybe that's why I like your show so much, is you resist that. You don't come out. Your show, Culture Determined is not a flag-waving show. I mean, you have Bernie people on your show, or you have, I think, and I think you've had guests that are much to the left of you, right? I think, especially if you're
for sure.
Especially if you describe yourself as an Obama Democrat, which might be, I don't know. People might hate that for all I know. I don't know. I mean, it's very politics is a moving target, right? And it's always changing, you know.
There's plenty. I mean, that is not like a cool thing to say that you still like Obama. 2022, and there's certainly, you know, he deserves a share of blame for the rise of Trump. So that's not great. But yeah, and sort of, I don't know, the way to market yourself online is to pick a tribe and align yourself with it, and then like pick fights with people on the other side.
Yeah.
And everyone gets riled up. And so I think that, well, I'm sure there's multiple reasons why the show hasn't gone, you know, hasn't gone supernova or something. But one of them is, you know, sort of I'm not on an identifiable team. And, you know, I'm not like carrying a banner for something because I don't know. I generally think like I don't know the answer to a lot of things. Yeah. And yeah.
Well, you're probably like a lot more of us than we often admit. You're trying to figure things out, and we don't know. I don't know. I mean, right? I mean, it's gotta. We're all. Sometimes it seems to be like we're all in kind of a wilderness of some sort.
Yes, for sure. And I think I don't know. I still, you know, the things that I take from Shakespeare in terms of like, you know, lessons for real life or something, you know, the fool thinks he's wise, but the wise man knows that he's a fool is something I think about. Mm-hmm. And just, yeah, I mean, if you were making confident predictions about things in 2015, 2016, some of which I made publicly and became embarrassed about, like, you know, the world is stranger and crazy things happened. And so, yeah, I just throw up my hands a lot of the time, and I'm asking questions, and but I certainly don't have many answers.
Well, I think it's sometimes important to have really good questions, right? I guess questions can be kind of maybe.
Questions are definitely important. Another something that a professor who was teaching a class on Nabokov said that always stuck with me was like, you know, the great novels often don't have an answer, they ask a question. And then, you know, you go from there. But any sort of like, yeah, I'm often disinclined to say for people who are like dogmatic about like, oh, the answer is obviously X. And then, you know, you have to go along with that. But I don't know, were you aware that there was an event within the past couple of weeks, like a conference that was called like Hereticon or something like this?
Yes.
So it was for like people who consider themselves like heretical thinkers, and a lot of people have podcasts. But I'm not like, I don't align myself with them at all. And I'm not like the type of person who is like, you know, you have to question the, like, you know, when the authorities say X, like you have to say not X. I'm not that type of person. And I'm not like Brett Weinstein, you know, investigating ivermectin or anything like that. But
yeah,
but I am just generally averse to people saying like, yeah, the answer is this, and so forth.
Well, I mean, it's a big problem. I mean, because obviously, so you know, invoking Obama is kind of very powerful. Now, you said it's not cruel. Now, that's interesting. Or
at least among my sort of age cohort, I would say.
I see.
Like, there are plenty of people who got disenchanted with Obama.
Yeah.
And feel like he, you know, didn't fulfill his promise, which, you know, in many ways he didn't. Like, you know, he definitely did unify the country or transcend racial bounds or blue state, red state bounds or anything like that. But I thought he basically did more or less a decent job. And there's so many ways to go wrong in that office that
sure.
You sort of have to give him like I thought, you know, sort of a B+, and that's, you know, as good as we can do in modern American life. But
a B+ might be like an A+. Like history could get so weird that if you give somebody a grade of a B+, that could become artificially an A+, given the weirdness of, right? That's kind of another way. You know,
yeah. And another thing that sort of rubs me the wrong way about a lot of online discourse is like the extreme moralism that, especially on social media, gets you a lot of attention. And so, just highly charged moral language, or believing that it's obvious, that it's self-evident that, what you're saying is 100% morally righteous. Like, that's a great way to get retweets, is to talk as if, you are morally correct and your enemies are moral degenerates. And, you could get, you could really build a platform that way. And I don't know, someone like Glenn Greenwald would maybe be an example of that. One of my other sort of online foes who barely even knows who I am, but someone who I was not a fan of before many other people realized they weren't a fan of him. But yeah, he is like, speaks as though he's like the prophet Jeremiah or something, denouncing all the evil in this world, and he always seems to know what the correct thing is, and be ready to damn various people. So that I don't like that style at all, and probably if I acted more like that, maybe I would have more followers on Twitter or something.
Well, yeah, I kind of had you on my show because you're kind of resisting some of these, I think, vices. I don't know what you want to call the vices. Certainty and maybe kind of a negative tribalism, maybe, or extremism. I do think there's something to political extremism being a vice, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, even though some of our problems might require extreme transformation, I am on the left, so certainly I'm attracted to that. But there's always a problem. I've spoken too much. You were going to say something, but
well, just a way to, I think I've said this on my show before. If you have a tweet that says like XYZ is the greatest thing in the world, it'll get attention. If you have a tweet that says XYZ is the worst thing in the world, that'll get attention. If you say something like, well, I don't really know about XYZ, why would anyone even retweet that? To begin with, you're barely saying anything that you don't know, But just extreme moral certainty gets attention online, and people who have that are able to generate a lot of attention for themselves.
Yeah.
And denouncing someone else in truly moralizing terms is a way to get everyone riled up. And a lot of various discourses are like, if you don't do what I say, like, the children are going to die. And sometimes maybe that, with the pandemic, that's more accurate than it would have been a couple of years ago.
That's right.
It always sort of comes down to, like, do you like children dying? Like, that's what you like? Like that sort of rhetoric. And it comes from left and right.
Everybody needs an anchor in life. You, me, just everybody. Anchor made this whole show possible. I'm immensely grateful to them. You too can use Anchor to make your own shows and create your own vision. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. It's interesting, getting back to Shakespeare, if you've seen Joel Roth's Macbeth and Denzel Washington, what's your impressions of that? Because that's on people's minds, right? Because that was just released.
I did. Yeah, I saw it a couple weeks ago. I liked it.
Yeah,
it was. I thought it should have gotten more. The Oscar nominations came out today. I was surprised that it didn't even get Best Picture, because I thought it was quite good. And it downplayed the emotion. A lot of it is people, like, the monologues are delivered more in like whispers, and it's more restrained, and you can definitely play, Macbeth as sort of a raging madman, which, kind of is.
Yeah.
And really until the end, it's very, they're definitely playing it at a lower register. And so I quite liked it, and it's sort of a homage or pastiche of like Orson Welles and Throne of Blood and other
Polanski,
like like mid-century things, and I like the styling sort of more than anything else, the way it looked and how it was sort of purposely artificial. At least that was my interpretation. Like the sets sort of looked like they were like fakey, and so I thought it was pretty good, and it would, as fun as the Macbeth could be, I would give it basically a thumbs up. I'm definitely a Coen Brothers fan, and so two of my interests coming together. I was like, okay, I definitely have to venture out and see this one.
Shakespeare and Coen. Well, it was an interesting book by the late. I don't know if you know that. You probably know this writer's work. City of what is it? It's an English scholar who wrote on screwball comedy. Blanking the comedy of remarriage. He wrote on Frank Capra and the women.
I don't think I know this one.
George Cukor, film critic. Anyhow, this critic, when asked who his favorite contemporary filmmaker was, says Joe-Nathan Cohen. Yeah, that's what he said. So that's an interesting. That's a common. It was a common view, right? Of comedy of remarriage, and that the Coen brothers are sort of carrying on film.
Yeah, I mean they have made like screwball comedies, like personal and homage pastiches of
right.
Like 30 screwball comedies, and Intolerable Cruelty would be one of those, and they're often sort of taking a genre and playing within it and playing by its rules and subverting it at the same time. I don't know. I've been a fan of theirs for a while, and Big Lebowski is one of my favorite movies, and
it's amazing.
Yeah, so I usually I try to see all their stuff.
Well, the critic I'm thinking of is Stanley Cavell, and actually Stanley Cavell includes a couple of Coen brothers films in his book. Mm-hmm. So I think he talks about "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou," mm-hmm. and I think he talks about it in reference to alongside Dark Victory or Now Voyager. Well, that's a really interesting book. You should check out that book. It's like a he pairs famous philosophers with movies. Mm-hmm. So actually Emerson gets discussed alongside Now Voyager. So there's a chapter on Emerson's essay Experience, and then he starts talking about Betty Davis, Paul Heinrich, Now Voyager. And I like that because I think that Emerson's is as important as that movie, right? I think they're kind of equivalent. I
should check that out. I mean, I do often like combining high and low in various ways, and I did one of the last episodes I did was when on the blogging site before taking the show independent was about the 1986 animated Transformers movie. Yep. Which was like one of the obsessions of my childhood, and I've seen it like 1,000 times, and so it's sort of objectively like a pop culture trash, and was made just to get little kids to buy more toys, and they killed off all the previous main characters so that the kids would ask their parents to buy the new toys. But it has these weird, that fact, I don't know, weirdly makes it compelling in a way, even though it's like a total commercial product in a lot of ways. But yeah, I definitely, and like I said, I was into comic books and stuff before comic books took over all of pop culture. And back when they definitely were not, it was not only were they not cool, they were sort of nothing in terms of pop culture in the mid to late 90s.
I mean, that's fascinating to me that you were into, as you said, you were into comic books before they became a thing, or before they became, I guess, an internet phenomenon or cool. You said they weren't even uncool; they were not even a thing, which is interesting. See, I don't know. That fascinates me. Any kind of obsessive, intense interest in something aesthetic fascinates me.
Yeah, I mean,
I think comic books are certainly. I mean, I'm no expert on comic books. You're more of an expert, so that's interesting. So, talk more about that because I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there were of course various times when like comic books or at least comic book characters were very popular, like the Superman and Batman movies.
Mm-hmm.
The 70s and 80s and stuff.
Yep.
The era where I sort of came of age with comics, they had sort of fallen away. I guess there was sort of a boom in the early 90s around like when there was a big general boom in collectibles and stuff with baseball cards and other things. And that was sort of in the early 90s. Then it faded away, and Marvel itself, they did declare bankruptcy at some point in the mid 90s. And, it was, there were a few superhero movies of that era, but like the one that was the most successful comic movie from that era was like Blade. I don't know if you remember that one with Wesley Snipes.
Oh yeah.
Which they're remaking now, but that's like barely, it comes from a comic character, but it's like a vampire movie, basically, a guy who kills vampires. But he was like a very third tier character in the Marvel universe.
That's right.
And so then it was just very marginal, and at the time, so I got into it about the same time the internet started, and there was a message board on America Online where I was talking about X-Men and stuff, circa like 1996.
Yeah.
And then when the X-Men movie came out, which I think was 2000, that was sort of the first thing where I was like, whoa, this is kind of crazy. And I was aging out of it at that point. But, it is strange that the thing that was, an afterthought is now like the dominant paradigm in global entertainment, and everyone is so sick of it because like all these great actors and directors are getting sucked into this world, and people are totally sick of it. So it is very strange.
Well, yeah, people get sick of it, but for reasons that are dubious, right? I mean, you could get sick of anything, but that doesn't mean that the thing you're sick of should be sick of, right? What I mean is that doesn't mean there's not life there to, right? I mean, that's really
yes, and I think. The thing is, at least the Marvel movies, most of them are actually like decent, or at least pretty good. There's some stinkers for sure because they made about 30 of them at this point. I think people are sick of sort of its all-consuming nature, and that that's every couple months there's another one that you feel like people feel like they have to pay attention to.
Well, I have no problem with great film directors criticizing that. Of course, that's Martin, in that sense, Martin Scorsese's correct, in quotes, quote, correct. In that sense, right? Anytime anything is that overrepresented, then it loses its, right? It kind of a currency kind of tanks, right? It goes into the toilet, right?
Right, and the way the fandom has evolved around it, especially online, where a lot of fandoms happen, I think is also. People who are sort of ambivalent about the whole thing get turned off by the rabid fandoms. And that's like a whole nother sort of, area of how the interaction between the fans and the, content creators, quote unquote. And, it becomes sort of a closed loop. But, I think, there's sort of around people my age, a little bit younger, I think there's sort of a nostalgia now for movies that came out in the 90s before everything was special effects, where like something like The Fugitive, where it's or I had Max Reed on my show, and he did this post about something he called 90s dad movies.
Oh yeah. That's a great show. I love that show. It's funny because I don't really have any fondness for those movies. Like I'm a bit of a contrarian. I actually dislike a lot of those movies that some people in your generation really want to love, and some of them I really don't like. But
it's interesting because people my age or younger would have seen those like on VHS or would have been on TV or something. because we would have been too young to see it in theaters. And so there's definitely a nostalgia aspect to it. But I think, I think part of it is they're more human or something because they are not about superhumans and they don't have, it's not all just special effects. They weren't filmed in front of a green screen and pieced together. Oh, yeah. In post-production.
That's what I was going to say. So even though I really strongly dislike a lot of those movies when they came out, and actually rewatching them might still dislike them. I might say, nah, I'm not going to rethink this. But I could see, as an aesthete, I could see the value of them in a very strange. So yes, from a classical drama perspective, there might be something there, right? It's kind of like, I'm not so. My dislike is not such that I won't want to hear somebody talk about it, right? It's kind of interesting. It's like,
So I'm just thinking about this now, but it's, sort of in the early 90s, there was sort of a Gen X nostalgia for
the 70s,
for stuff like Speed Racer or other sort of like pop culture trashy stuff that came out in the late 60s and early 70s.
Right.
And Tarantino played in that, like, kung fu movies and other things that weren't respected much at the time. Yeah. But now, now that's sort of everything. Everything's like a cartoon or a merchandise or everything. Mm-hmm. And so going back to something where it's just like, let's watch Harrison Ford try to outwit, some like ex-communists. Or some former like Soviet spies from some like terrorists of some imaginary Eastern European nation or something. I don't know. That seems some sort of appeal.
Well, Harrison Ford, I'm somebody that looks at Harrison Ford and has almost a memory, not a memory. I have a consciousness of him almost being the lead in Model Shop, right? So I look at Harrison. I do look at Harrison Ford with this kind of historical. He could have been instead of Lockhart, the male lead in the film I Love by Agnes Varda called Model Shop. And so I'm thinking about Harrison Ford hanging out with Agnes Varda in '69 in California. So my perception of him includes information like that. So I don't.
Right, and of course he was in like two of the big pop culture. George Lucas associated pop culture trilogies of the 70s and 80s. But yeah, he was in a lot of, all those Clear and Present Danger and Air Force One and Fugitive and movies like that.
Yeah.
So there's, I don't know. So there's definitely, some interest in that. And I think it is in part a exhaustion with the CGI, spectacular kind of thing.
I've never been a believer in guilty pleasure. I think it's a bogus notion. Your pleasure is your pleasure. If you like something that's really poppy, maybe the thing that you love that's poppy is great. Maybe it's not junk. And maybe it was just circulated as junk because some critics said so, and maybe there is virtue there. I don't know. I'm pretty open-minded in that sense, right? I sort of feel like I think all these things are up for grabs or up for, reconsideration, right? It's kind of
right. So Harold Bloom would not agree with this because he was, very, very much a snob and dismissed Harry Potter and other such things as penny dreadfuls. Yeah.
But Penny Dreadfuls, but as you know, Penny Dreadfuls was a genre of writing, of fiction.
Right.
So that in itself is interesting. But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. But.
No, just that. Yeah. I think he may have been the last of that sort of critic that was trying to uphold. He wrote the book, The Western Canon, where he said he decided what was and wasn't in the Western Canon. Yeah. But he was like fighting a losing battle at that point, and the way the stuff from the the ones would have been considered junk for kids. Is now totally taken over the culture. I assume he was not a fan of that. But so I'm, generally interested in both high and low. And I think it's just strangely the case that low, sort of like, I don't know, like the middle got hollowed out as like low culture completely took over, at least in Hollywood.
Well, that's it. Well, isn't that interesting? Because you're seeing now, like my friend Daniel Kramer, who I've had on my show, is singing the praises of Ordinary People, right? Like, well, people want to say Apocalypse Now is the great film, but Ordinary People's is good. You know, this simple little Robert Redford film. You know, don't dismiss Ordinary People, right? Is that kind of what you mean? There's a sense in which people reconsider things that are dismissed by critics or seen as less lightweight. Maybe the lightweight thing is good, is heavy, right? That kind of thing is kind of, yeah.
Yeah, and I think people just, you know, feel like you couldn't make a movie like Ordinary People today because it would either have to be like a total indie, or you know, like a you know that A24 or something would put out. Yeah. They probably wouldn't even do it, or it, you know, it doesn't have any superheroes or something. Some major studio wouldn't do it.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess it would need to have some sort of like horror element or something for maybe an indie to, you know, to get involved, because you know genre stuff is so popular right now. But yeah, just sort of normal, you know, normal stories about actual people. There's not as many of them as there were like 30 years ago.
That's interesting. So where do you see your show in the cultural landscape? I mean, you take it independent. I know you made an announcement about that. Do you want to talk about your decision to do that, or what?
Sure.
For those that don't know, because I'm actually an outsider, I don't really know. Was that a? We'll speak about that because I don't really know.
Well, yeah. So the show started at Blogging Heads because I was an editor there, and started in 2015. So it was basically a 7-year run, which, considering podcasting is, you know, maybe has existed for like 15 years or so. That's a pretty long run in the podcast world. But yeah, there were various reasons to take it independent. Some were sort of related to Blogging Heads' resources, and some were related to wanting to try to monetize it in a way that I couldn't when it was still on that site, such that I could, you know, keep doing it and possibly pay my rent. That'd be nice. But and also the limitations that the blogging format, which continued to be both a video thing where you can watch the episodes on YouTube, but also essentially still an audio podcast. Anyway, so the show is going to be, at least in its initial reboot, is going to be just an audio podcast, like most other podcasts. There's a YouTube channel that is on, but for now, at least, I think it will be just, you know, it'll just appear on YouTube as audio with like still images.
Okay. Okay.
Because there's, you know, YouTube has its own ecosystem of people who host shows and stuff, and I'm definitely not that type of person who is often very high energy and is also very outrage driven, like. You know, so-and-so destroys SJW college student or something. Yeah. Like, that's a very popular genre on YouTube. So I'm going to just keep the channel, the independent, culturally determined channel going. Yeah. Because it's, you know, has a little bit of traction. But I think of the show more as an audio podcast, and so I can have lower overhead without the video component, which adds all these complications in terms of things that can go wrong in the recording, or just extra time to put the whole thing together. So that was part of it too. That you know, Bob Wright, who founded Blogging Heads, co-founded it, you know, was an innovator in the video space, and he remains committed to that. Whereas I thought at a certain point the video on the web was no longer a novel thing and wasn't adding a lot of extra value. Because there are people who will sit in front of their screen and watch two people talk to each other for an hour. Yeah. But there's more people who will listen to a podcast as they're doing, you know, taking a walk or doing the dishes or something. And
I'm in total agreement. You got to have both. You have to have that flexibility, right? As you said, people taking the dog for a walk's important, and, you know, kind of it's all kind of a new thing out there in culture.
Right.
So what are your hopes and wishes going forward with Culturally Determinative? What comes to your mind that you want to say to the audience here that you think is important, a movie that people need to see, or a book they need to read, or something in your show that what's your next plan, or whatever comes to your mind that
I think the show is going to be basically what it was before, which is a different guest each week, me asking questions. I mean, the topics are still essentially going to be whatever interests me. And, I remember when I started the show on Blogging Heads, I think I said something like, what are the topics, asking the audience commenters, what are the topics you'd like to see covered? And there were more than one person said something like, you should talk about jazz or something. But I don't know anything about jazz and don't have an interest in jazz. And, you can listen to NPR and learn a lot about jazz.
So, we wouldn't. Yeah, I'm all about jazz. You mean jazz and music?
Yeah, so high-end jazz, criticism about jazz, like, that's out there. I'm not going to do that because I'm not the person for that. Though it's still going to continue to be reflecting my interests.
Well, your last show was about, your most recent show I found fascinating. It was about a Tom Friedman column, right? About like Tom Friedman's column about, and I thought, well, that's kind of, everybody can relate to that because like the country's at stake, right? And democracy, and like Liz Cheney and what was it, Joe Biden, Liz Cheney ticket. I thought, well,
this is Tom Friedman's thought experiment provocative column that, Biden should dump Kamala Harris and take Liz Cheney as his running mate, sort of using the recent Israeli coalition government where it was just disparate parties who all hated Bibi Netanyahu got together. He was using that. It was definitely sort of intended to be provocative. And a lot of people online got very mad about it and were dunking on it. And people on a certain section of Twitter hold Tom Friedman under contempt. And so I made sort of a half defense of the column, and essentially along the lines of, if Trump is a genuine threat to American democracy, which I think he's more of than I would have thought a year ago. Yeah. I thought it's sort of like over for him more or less, but he still, he keeps on going and the GOP is going along with him. So does that mean that we do need some sort of grand coalition or something to oppose him? Yeah,
that's an important question because that's an existential question, right? So we agree. You and I agree on that. But then I don't like Tom Friedman's conservatism and his neoliberalism historically. I read his book, the Lexus and the Olive Tree. I did not read it as a teenager. I read it as an adult. And I didn't agree with it and don't like it, that everything associated with that. On the other hand, I might agree with him if he's trying to prevent fascism or prevent, so it's tricky, right? So it's kind of hard to, I guess we sort of wrestle with this. I mean, I would like to see a Kamala Harris, Liz Cheney pairing. Who knows? I don't know. Who knows where we go from here? Any ideas? I don't know. Do you, maybe?
I don't know. I actually do. I do think that Trump is not going to run. And I guess at this point, that is, not that's the contrarian take or something. And, my essential read on Trump starting in 2015 and, before that as when I was just exposed to him as an entertainer was, like a con artist. And he's going to do whatever he can to keep the con going. And so I think he is probably happier being in Florida, living in a country club, having, a sycophants applaud every time he enters a room, and being sort of this weird kingmaker type rather than actually having to go to meetings and have people try to explain things to him that he doesn't understand. Mm-hmm. And, now he gets to play golf as much as he wants. He gets to watch TV as much as he wants. He did a lot of that while he was president. Yeah. But I think he sort of is done with the political, like that aspect of the political grift. And, he has this startup company that's going to be like some version of Twitter or something that has this scam aspect with the investment vehicle that he's put together for it. So, he can live off that sort of scam, and he's an old man at this point. And I think he's going to keep that sort of thing going, or really start his own television network or something like that, rather than actually run for president again, which is a lot of work and, does require a lot of effort. And certainly he's an energetic person, and he's like a weird mix of energetic and lazy, like intellectually lazy, but like sort of energizer bunny in his, the inability to stop doing something. But I think he's gonna tease the media, and he wants attention for himself above anything else, and then continue with sort of like medium level grifts and scams instead of this grand like scam that he managed to pull off by becoming elected president. Right.
Well, there's grifts and there's scams, and there's running the country as a grift and a scam, and that's Marx's admonition about tragedy and farce. Notwithstanding, maybe Marx has it reversed. Maybe it's first farce and then tragedy. Feels like that.
Well, they definitely. I mean, up until COVID, it was largely farcical, the Trump presidency, and then suddenly became much more tragic.
Yeah.
But the Capitol insurrection was both tragedy and farce
at the same time.
United, and I think more farce than tragedy.
Interesting.
Because of the ridiculousness of the entire thing. But that would. I mean, and so another area where I sort of depart from some people on the left is thinking that, I don't know. Well, there's people who think that January 6th was, like they could have, like the mob could have actually overthrown democracy or something, and I don't think that was likely. But then there's also the people on the left who want to minimize it because it doesn't sort of fit into their
narrative
schema, and they are afraid of, a sort of new, like domestic terror law or something like that would eventually
I'm definitely
clamp down on dissent. And
that's infighting in the left, and I'm definitely not on that side of the left. I agree with Kamala Harris, and it's like Pearl Harbor, and it's like awful. So that's kind of, I'm showing, I guess, my true colors, right? And saying, making an assertion.
Right. But it still had this, I think it was serious but farcical. It had this total absurd, dumb aspect to it. Yeah. And it was all these people, most of whom I think were like deeply confused and misled by the media they consume and Trump's lies.
Yeah.
But, other people who were sort of just there for like a happening or a be-in sort of thing, or an experience, or to take selfies, or to live stream, or to, become more popular online.
Right.
And so it was this cavalcade of morons and jokers and some legit dangerous people.
Yeah.
But they couldn't have, I mean, I've said this on the show, if, why the Capitol Police are so poorly prepared for this is a legitimate, serious question.
Oh, yeah.
But if they had just had 3 times as many people with like the actual helmets and shields and stuff and like proper gates, then the mob would have been repelled, I think, pretty easily. And like they could have just turned like fire hoses on them and they would have dispersed. So it had this very pathetic, stupid aspect to it, in addition to the seriousness of it. So it fits with the whole, just that like everything with Trump, everything related to Trump is stupid and a farce and like the dumbest thing possible. It was a fitting, and in that way, it was a fitting end to his term.
Well, Aryeh, I really enjoyed this discussion a lot, and again, I'm glad that you're doing your show and that your show's out there in the world. Is there anything, as even good things come to an end, is there anything you want to say in conclusion, or tell people about your show, or anything else that
Well, I thank you for inviting me on. I appreciate it. Usually on my show, I'm not talking as much as I talked in this episode. Usually I'm playing the host interlocutor role, and I'm trying to have the guest talk much more than I do. But yeah, so the show is culturally determined. Find it in your podcast feed. It's also on YouTube, and it's in a brief hiatus now while I get things ready to relaunch it independently.
Excellent.
But yeah, so it's an interview show about culture and politics, and trying to find interesting stuff to talk about. And so hopefully I'm going to have coming up Dana Stevens from Slate on, who has a new sort of cultural biography of Buster Keaton.
Oh, wow.
That just was published a week ago. And
I got to hear this. That's fascinating. So already, that's a great out the gate. That's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's not recorded yet, but I hope that will be one of the first ones. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm aiming to have it be more or less weekly. The last year I did about 40 or so episodes, and I think I can keep close to a weekly schedule. So that would be the goal. Mm-hmm. And yeah, so it's also always been on the blogging platform, free and without ads. So it's sort of finally time to try to make this thing self-sustaining in some way. Yep. So there'll be some sort of Patreon type thing. I still haven't figured that out entirely, but
yep. We're all trying to
hopefully it'll be something where people want to put a little money to get some bonus content or something, they can do that as well.
Well, I'm thinking I might title this episode of The Wisdom of the Introvert. How would you feel about that?
It's interesting. I mean, it's a common thing these days to talk about yourself, introvert, extrovert, ambivert. I don't know if you've heard that term. That's people who see themselves as both. And I still sort of think I am a naturally introverted person, but when you're, hosting a podcast, you have to push yourself out there a little bit more. So I've moved more towards extroverted and having more confidence in, talking off the cuff and stuff like that. So yes, I'm not sure if the introverts would claim me still, because maybe that type of person would, is fine just reading a book and so forth. So yeah, I'm more towards the middle now than I used to be. But I do definitely try to, on the show, to listen and get. It's not always people who. It's not a show where I'm aiming to debate and argue, but I'm not looking for a hallelujah chorus kind of thing either. And if there's someone who has an argument where there's parts I agree with, parts that I disagree with, that's maybe most interesting to me. But I also do, want to have more people on who are more on the right or something, who I think are, whose work I respect and aren't part of the, conservative entertainment complex that we have out there. So those are some goals. And and sometimes I'll just do weird one-off episodes about, I did an episode with the writer Katie Baker, who wrote this piece about Nickelodeon in the late 80s and early 90s. Just sort of that was weird cultural things that interest me that have don't have anything to do with what's happening in the main part of public life.
Well, I think it all matters, and I really appreciate your approach, and that's why you're on the show. And I hope you can keep doing what you're doing, Aryeh, because I like it. And
well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I guess I should plug. I always, at the end of the podcast, you're always supposed to plug, and I feel sort of it's you're crossing the finish line or something. I'm exhausted, and then it's oh yeah, I'm supposed to plug everything. Yeah, so Culturally Determined is the name of the podcast. I'm on Twitter. That would be the safe place to find me otherwise. And it's ARYEHCW.
Yes.
One word on Twitter. And so follow me there if you're interested.
Well, thank you, Aryeh. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. I don't like goodbyes, so I'll see you soon, folks. Thank you.